Hey everybody, my name's Dr. Scott Giacomucci. I'm the director and founder of the Phoenix Center for Experiential Trauma Therapy in Media, Pennsylvania. Today, I wanted to spend some time talking about the difference between derealization and depersonalization. These are two different experiences that often overlap and are very common to experience for folks that have survived trauma. So if you've ever felt disconnected from yourself or disconnected from the world around you, or it feels like things aren't exactly, don't feel real, these are what we call derealization and depersonalization. So derealization and depersonalization are part of a sub-diagnosis for PTSD called a dissociative subtype. And basically, somewhere between 15% and 30% of people with PTSD also are experiencing derealization and or depersonalization. So what's the difference? Derealization is when it feels like the world around us is unreal, distant, or dreamlike. It feels like we're living in a fantasy world, or that this is all a simulation. Object might seem blurry or distorted or artificial, or sounds might be muffled, or smells or tastes, or time might feel like it's moving very quickly or very slowly. But we have this sense that reality is being distorted, like we're watching life through a fog or a movie screen, but that it doesn't feel real, that it feels like a dream perhaps. So that's derealization. Depersonalization is when we feel disconnected from ourselves. We feel like we're watching ourselves from outside. We feel a sense of emotional numbness or disconnection, or we feel like we don't have control over our actions, that we're just going through the motions, that we're a robot, that we've lost our sense of connection to humanity. We've lost our sense of connection to our own humanity, really. That our feeling, our body, our voice, our thoughts don't belong to us. That we're floating outside of ourselves or seeing ourselves outside of ourselves. That's what we call depersonalization. So derealization is when our sense of reality we feel disconnected to a sense of reality. Depersonalization is when we feel disconnected from our sense of self. So those are the two main differences. Again, they often go hand in hand, and they are much more common than most of us realize. 15 to 30% of folks with PTSD are experiencing this. It's like unique forms of dissociation, really. And dissociation is one of the most common reactions to trauma, one of the most common defense mechanisms. It's a common way that our mind, our brain, our nervous system tries to protect itself from the pain of the trauma. So in some of the research, what they find is that most people who are experiencing derealization or depersonalization tend to be men, tend to be folks that had experienced complex trauma rather than just one-time experiences of trauma, and tend to be folks who are experiencing not just PTSD, but also other types of mental health disorders at the same time. And so there's a kind of complexity and interaction effect that happens that for some reason seems to manifest in derealization or depersonalization. What they also find in research is that for folks with PTSD who are experiencing derealization or depersonalization, it has a greater impact on their daily functioning than classical PTSD, and it increases risks of suicide, which is very concerning. When we think about the ways that trauma impacts us, it makes sense that it might result in derealization or depersonalization or both. Naturally, when we experience something overwhelming and traumatic, our nervous system, our brain is trying to process it, trying to make sense of it, and trying to protect ourselves from more of it. And so naturally, our brain is trying to detach and separate and create space between ourselves and the trauma. And when we can't do that physically, we can't escape, we can't fight back, we can't protect ourselves physically, we're just going to protect ourselves emotionally and mentally. We're going to detach, we're going to disassociate from the trauma. And we do this in the moment of the trauma, but we also do this when the trauma gets activated internally. we dissociate from our internal experience too. Although it can be really disruptive in relationships and can impact concentration and productivity and fulfillment in life and our ability to trust ourselves, it can impact us in lots of negative ways. At its core, dissociation is just a way we're trying to protect ourselves. So derealization, depersonalization are types of dissociation. In derealization, we detach from reality. In depersonalization, we detach from ourselves. So if our reality is traumatizing or adverse or hopeless or stressful, we might be more likely to experience derealization. We're detaching from it. We're trying to block it out. We're trying to protect ourselves from that reality. If what we're experiencing internally is intolerable, is painful, is overwhelming, then we might detach from our sense of self. Depersonalization. We might dissociate from ourself, from our sense of self, from our body, from our identity, in order to try to protect ourselves from the pain and conflict and trauma we're feeling within ourselves. So these are two core ways how they're different and how they relate to dissociation. When our brain's in survival mode constantly, dissociation can be a really common and frequent escape. It's like there's so much stress going on and we just need a break from it. And so we will either intentionally or unconsciously resort to detaching from it, to dissociation, to taking a break from it. And we do this all the time. Sometimes in ways that are more adaptive, like maybe we zone out for a couple minutes when we're bored, or we scroll on Instagram for a couple minutes to pass the time or to calm ourselves down. Or we watch a movie and check out for a bit, or we imagine something we hope for in the future. Those are some, relatively harmless ways of dissociating from our experience. Problem is that when we do them all the time or constantly, or when we engage in other forms of detaching from our experience, that they can really cause us harm or impact our relationships. Like if we are in the middle of an important conversation in a relationship, and then we dissociate because it's too uncomfortable. And then we're not really hearing the other person and what they're asking us, what they're telling us. That could really impact the relationship. Or maybe when we're in dissociative states, we end up acting out on anger, or we end up saying or doing things that we regret later. Or maybe when we experience something threatening, we freeze and dissociate and detach. And in doing so, we're not avoiding the threat that's coming. And that could cause us more harm. Or maybe we're using self-harm or substance abuse or drinking or restricting food in order to dissociate from our experience. These can all snowball into other problems. So high stress levels can really lead to our brain, our mind searching and seeking for any escape, any way of detaching and getting away from that traumatic stress. This is why dissociation, derealization, depersonalization are very common when it comes to trauma. They also occur outside of the experience of trauma and traumatic stress too. Now, if you notice that you tend to resort to dissociation, derealization, or depersonalization, there's lots of different things that you can do to help ground yourself. Here's some of the simplest things. There's a really simple technique called the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. This is where you identify 5 things that you can see in your room, and you scan the room and point them out. You look for 4 things that you can feel. Maybe I can feel the cup of water in my hand, or I can feel my phone and the texture of the phone case, or I can feel the clothes on my body, or I can feel the cool air in the room here. We look for 3 things we can hear. I can hear the fan in my camera going off because I've been recording for a while. And I can hear the sound machine outside my office door here. And I can hear the television on in the other room in my home. 2 things that you can smell. So you smell, you really focus on that sense of smell. And 1 thing that you can taste. So this 5-4-3-2-1 technique is really just scanning through the senses to help ground us in the here and now. Because what we're feeling, tasting, smelling, seeing, hearing is related to the here and now. This can really help us navigate dissociation and also flashbacks. Sometimes, depending on the nature of the flashback might include seeing things from the past, or smelling things from the past, or hearing things from the past, or feeling things from the past. So this technique is really about grounding us, anchoring us in the present moment. Another simple thing that can be really helpful is exposing yourself to different temperatures. So cold water or hot water or ice cubes or frozen objects, ice cream, something that can really stimulate your sense of touch and bring you back to the moment. Anything that involves movement can be really helpful. Jumping jacks, push-ups, stretching, yoga, exercise, weightlifting, running, something that's going to really bring you into your body and require some hand-eye coordination. One thing that we use in my therapy groups sometimes is we'll throw objects back and forth to each other. And when the group's throwing objects back and forth, you really got to be in the present moment, paying attention in order to catch the ball when it's thrown at you. So this can really help ground you in the here and now. Now, if somebody's in a dissociative state, I'm not going to throw something at them because chances are they're not here enough to catch it. So we want to be sensitive about that one as well. Listening to music, engaging in essential oils, eating something, especially something sour or spicy. Like at our office, we keep those candies from our childhood, the warheads. The really intense sour candies, we keep those around. And if somebody's really struggling to ground themselves, we might offer them a warhead. And the intensity of that sour taste is going to help bring them into their body. Another thing that can be really useful for grounding is breathing exercises. So we really can regulate our nervous system and ground ourselves by taking some deep breaths. Usually after just taking one deep breath, you can notice some subtle differences within what you're feeling emotionally and sensationally. So if we take a series of deep breaths, it could really change how we're feeling and really help ground us in the present moment. Pets are really helpful for grounding. Anytime we can engage with another calm nervous system, whether that's our dog or our cat, or our partner, or our friend, massage, any kind of physical touch with someone who's in a calm, regulated state is going to almost have a contagious effect on us and help us calm our nervous system as well. So these are just some simple things that you can do to help ground yourself if you're experiencing dissociation, derealization, or depersonalization. These experiences can feel scary, but it's important to know that they're temporary and they're also treatable. So I encourage you to seek out trauma therapy if you're experiencing derealization or if you're experiencing depersonalization. A trauma therapist is trained to help you recover from trauma, to help ground yourself, and help you work through these types of experiences. If you found this video useful, I encourage you to subscribe to our channel to get notified about future videos. And if there's some sort of coping strategy or behavior that you found helpful in navigating derealization or depersonalization or dissociation in general, I encourage you to write it in the chat and share that with others.